The thin fabric of Alara's uniform felt useless against the predatory stares of the men in the VIP suite. Every clink of their whiskey glasses tightened the knot of dread in her stomach. She was trapped, not just in this room, but in a life she'd run 1,000 miles to escape, only to find the same monsters wearing different faces. In the corner of her eye, she saw him, the man who sat in the same booth every single night, a quiet, intense shadow in a world of noise. He never smiled, and his dark eyes missed nothing. He was just a customer, a silent observer. But tonight, as a hand clamped down on her arm, hard and possessive, Alara knew she wouldn't survive another minute. With a sob, she ripped her arm free and ran. Not for the door, not for her useless manager. She ran toward the one island of stillness in the room, her desperate plea a ragged whisper. Please, they're harassing me. The man, Kang Dae-ho, didn't even look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on his drink. Suddenly, the noisy suite fell silent. The men who had been laughing moments before were now frozen, their faces pale. Dae-ho lifted a single finger. From the shadows near the entrance, two figures emerged, moving with a liquid grace that was terrifying. They didn't rush. They didn't speak. They just approached the men who had cornered Alara. One of the harassers, full of liquid courage, scoffed. Who do you think you are? Dae-ho finally lifted his head. His eyes weren't angry. They were cold, empty. He spoke one word in Korean, a syllable that cut through the air like ice. The effect was instant. The harasser's face twisted in pure terror. Before anyone could make a sound, Dae-ho's men were on them. It wasn't a messy fight. It was a brutally efficient, almost silent removal. One moment, the men were there, smug and aggressive. The next, they were being dragged from the room, their protests dying in their throats. The door clicked shut, plunging the suite into a silence that was louder than all the noise before. Dae-ho gave a quiet, dismissive wave to the terrified manager who finally showed up. Then, his dark, unreadable eyes landed on Alara. She stood trembling, her heart hammering against her ribs. What he did next shocked her more than the violence. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently push a chair out with his foot. Sit, he said, his voice a low rumble. You are safe now. Just an hour earlier, safety felt like a distant dream. Alara had been in the city for 6 months, a ghost running from a past that threatened to swallow her whole. The job at the Gilded Peony was a lifeline, cash in hand, no questions asked. Most of the wealthy customers barely saw the staff as people, and for Alara, that invisibility was a shield. She learned to move through the dining room like a shadow, her face a polite, forgettable mask. But you can't hide from everything. The group of thugs, calling themselves the Jade Tigers, had been a problem for weeks. Their harassment was getting worse. Leering stares turned into unwelcome touches, and lewd comments became outright threats. Tonight, they had her cornered in the VIP suite, and their intentions were terrifyingly clear. Her manager, as usual, was nowhere to be found. She was completely alone. Her eyes had drifted, as they often did, to the man in booth number 7. Kang Dae-ho. He'd been coming in every night since she started. He always ordered the same thing, always sat alone, and always paid in cash, leaving a generous tip. There was an aura of power around him that was different from the loud, flashy wealth of the other patrons. It was a heavy, silent authority. His stillness was somehow more intimidating than their threats. To Alara, he was an enigma, a fixture of her nightly routine she was careful never to disturb. She never imagined she'd one day run to him for help. Now, sitting in the deafening silence, she looked at the man who had just destroyed her attackers with a single word and realized she had just traded one kind of danger for another. After dismissing the restaurant staff and paying a bill that could cover Alara's rent for a year, Dae-ho had simply said, "I'm taking you home." But this wasn't the way to her shabby little apartment. The luxury car glided through the glittering streets of Seoul and up into the hills, stopping before a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. He led her to a penthouse, a palace of glass and steel with a view that stole her breath. "You can't go back to your apartment," he stated, his back to her. It wasn't a suggestion. They know who you are. They know where you work. And now, they know you're connected to me. He turned, and in the bright light of the penthouse, she saw the intricate dragon tattoo coiling up his neck, its scales disappearing beneath his shirt collar. He walked over, stopping just inches away. He noticed a small, red scratch on her forearm where one of the men had grabbed her. His movements were slow as he reached out. Alara flinched, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he traced the line of the scratch with his thumb. "My name is Kong Dae-ho," he said, his voice low. "I am the head of the Eunguang Syndicate." Those men were from a rival group, the Jade Tigers, an irritating gang of wannabes. "By running to me, you chose a side," Dae-ho said, his gaze intense. "In their eyes, that makes you mine. They will come after you with twice the fury." He told her she would be staying here, in the penthouse, where his security was absolute. It was, he said, for her protection. The days that followed were strange. Dae-ho was a ghost in his own home. He gave her clothes, food from a private chef, and anything she needed, yet he remained distant, a powerful, brooding presence. Alara was torn. The fear was a constant knot in her stomach, but alongside it, a new feeling was growing. A profound sense of safety she had never known. For the first time in years, she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder. The monster she was living with kept all the other monsters away. One evening, she found him on the balcony, staring out at the city. She gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why? Why are you doing this for me? I'm a stranger." Dae-ho was silent for a long moment. "I've been watching you for a while, Alara," he admitted. "You walked into my restaurant 6 months ago, but I first saw you 3 years ago. You were working at a small cafe. You gave your own lunch to a homeless man your manager had thrown out. You showed kindness in a world that had shown you none." He turned to face her. "I kept my distance because my world is dangerous. But tonight, they put their hands on you. They crossed a line." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I had my people erase your past when you started at my restaurant. The people you were running from, they can't find you anymore. You have no old life to go back to." The revelation hit her like a punch. He hadn't just saved her, he had quietly taken control of her entire life. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, protected by the most dangerous man in the city. And her fear was now mixed with a bewildering, terrifying fascination. The fragile piece of the penthouse shattered a week later. The Jade Tigers, too cowardly to move against Dae-ho directly, retaliated. They went after the owner of the Gilded Peony, extorting him for allowing one of Dae-ho's interests to be harassed on his property. It was a message. Dae-ho received the news with a chilling calm. He made a single phone call, his voice low and guttural as he spoke in rapid-fire Korean. Alara didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of a death sentence. But the real threat came from higher up. The leader of the Jade Tigers was backed by a larger Triad faction looking to move in on Dae-ho's territory. The Triad leader saw Alara as a tool. He believed he had found Kong Dae-ho's weakness. A direct threat was delivered. Give up control of the port, or the Waitress disappears. It was the last mistake they would ever make. They hadn't found his weakness. They had triggered his rage. What followed wasn't a war fought on the streets. It was a complete annihilation conducted from his quiet penthouse office. Dae-ho dismantled an empire with information. He made calls that froze bank accounts, leaked secrets that turned partners into enemies, and exposed supply chains to international law enforcement. He pulled the strings, and across the city, the Jade Tigers and their allies crumbled from the inside out. Their power evaporated in less than 48 hours. He returned to the living room late the next night, looking weary but finished. Alara was waiting, a cup of tea in her hands. She'd seen the news, the reports of arrests, and a criminal network collapsing. She looked at him, the man who had just burned an entire organization to the ground for her. The fear was finally gone, replaced by a profound, overwhelming awe. He stopped in front of her. "It's over," he said. "No one will ever threaten you again." He looked at her, and the cold mask he wore for the world finally cracked. "They thought you were my weakness," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you are not my weakness, Alara. You are my strength. You reminded me I had something to protect." He reached out and gently took the cup from her, setting it aside. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a jolt through her. "You are untouchable," he vowed. Because you belong to me. This time, it wasn't a threat or a claim. It was a promise. He closed the distance between them, and when his lips met hers, it wasn't the kiss of a captor, but of a man who had finally found something more valuable than his entire empire. She was no longer just a waitress, and he was no longer just a customer. They were two broken pieces that, against all odds, had found a way to become whole. In the silent aftermath, Alara looked at Kang Dae-ho and saw not a monster, but a man who had shielded her with his own darkness. Her old life of running and hiding was gone, erased by his power. In its place was a new reality, lived in a gilded cage that had somehow become her sanctuary. She was bound to the city's most feared man, not by chains, but by a fierce, possessive care that became her salvation. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of shocking decisions and unexpected romance.